And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Ask Me Anything for Being Buyer First. I am Carol Mahoney, and I'm solo today, but we have some great things planned for our future Buyer First Ask Me Anything. So make sure that you stay tuned because I'm going to be making a call for some interviews and guest speakers coming up in the next couple of months. But if this is your first time here at the Buyer First Ask Me Anything, let me let you know what's going on. So I am obsessed with transforming sales so that we become buyer first, meaning that instead of getting what we want out of sales conversations, we're focused on what do buyers need to get out of sales conversations. There's too much research and data that shows that buyers are in control of the entire buying process. I mean, I could cite statistics that talk about how 33% of buyers don't even want to interact with a salesperson, according to Gartner. But on the flip side of that is that 23% of buyers who don't interact with a salesperson have a 23% greater higher purchase regret. In other words, they have buyer's remorse. So it's not that we don't need salespeople. We need a different kind of salesperson. And that's what we're here to talk about is how do we take our traditional sales tactics and how do we transform them to become more buyer first and buyer centric, because the buying experience is what sets up your customer experience later on. And unfortunately, when you look at the hashtags that are followed on LinkedIn for customer experience and customer journey, there are millions of people following that. But the number of people that are talking about being buyer first and the buyer experience, right now it's barely 100 people that are talking about that. This is something that we need to change if we're going to transform not just the perception of sales, but the performance of sales. So I've had a couple of questions that have been coming up a lot recently that I wanted to address today. But if you're here and you have a specific question that you want to ask about, how do I be more successful in my sales conversations? How do I help my sellers to have better sales conversations? Then make sure you type those into the comment pane. I have Lou behind the scenes who's going to bring up those questions as you ask them. So start typing if you've got a question. But first, I want to address one of the first most common questions that I've been hearing lately from sellers and, well, complaints from buyers. And that is, well, prospecting. How do you prospect in a buyer first way? What are my best prospecting tips to be buyer first? I was asked this recently. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you is you've got to do the research and research beyond the industry that they're in or the role that they're in. All too often, what I see sellers do is they look at their LinkedIn profile, they see what type of role and industry that they're in, and then they start plugging in their little coisms, right? Like, oh, I see that you're in this industry and in this role, so you must be worried about X. That doesn't add any value to the person that you're talking to. So instead, when you're doing your research, what I want you to do is dig deeper. Find their LinkedIn profile and look at how did they get into this role? What did they have for their education? What roles did they do previously? Are they new into this role? Is this something they've never done before? Do they have a lot of experience doing it? Dig even deeper. Who do they report to? What are the metrics that people in their industry and roles are measured by? And what are the trends that are happening in their industry right now that others like them are trying to figure out? And then go to the company profile. If you go to LinkedIn and you go to find out what about them is, you can look at the different insights that have been happening internally. Are they hiring a lot in particular departments that you impact? Or has there been a decline in that? And how would you be able to understand how that's going to impact them with the solution that you offer? What's their business model? What's their revenue model? How do they make money? How do they help other people? One of the things that drives me absolutely insane and drives buyers absolutely insane is when a seller gets on their first call and says, so tell me about your company. Really? Like, I shouldn't have to tell you about my company. It's everywhere online. It wouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to find out who we are and what we do. So if you're asking that as a first question in your discovery calls, stop it. Just stop it. Do some research. Have an idea of how you think that they make money and ask them questions about that. And then with that research, craft a message to them that you can share some kind of a data point and relate it to an insight that maybe they hadn't fully realized or considered before. This could be insights from what your own customers are doing and saying like them. You know, for example, I work with a lot of software companies who have literally hundreds of thousands of customers and users. There is a lot of data there that you could be able to understand, that you could be able to feed back to some of the buyers that you're talking to that they might not fully realize or understand. And if you don't have a lot of customers to be able to pull data and insights from, then look at what are some of the things that are happening in their industry that you learned in your own research. What are their associations talking about? What is the news and the headlines that are happening, and how might that impact them? Are there regulations and rules that have changed that might impact them? Supply chains, for example. What are the economic uncertainties and how does that impact them? Then, once you've found more about them and how they make money and some type of research or data point that you can relate to an insight for them, then ask your diagnostic open-ended question about how they think about this or how they handle this particular thing. And ask if they'd like to learn how others like them are achieving quantifiable results. Let me repeat that: quantifiable results. Now, if I do this for my business as well. So when I do this, my messaging, my prospecting sounds something like this. Did you know that sales emails increased by 37% since the pandemic started, but that response rates dropped by 23%? This is according to data from HubSpot and benchmarking over hundreds of companies. Well, now, what this means for you, if you're in technology sales, is that your cost of sales and customer acquisition is going up exponentially. And for those technology companies who already have the highest customer acquisition costs, some are deciding to invest in technology and automation, or others are using freemium models for demand generation. Now, what they don't realize is that they're creating the very problems that they're trying to solve for when most of us ignore those impersonal and automated messages. And it's really difficult to upsell on value when your customer's price point's been anchored at zero, which makes customer retention even more important for you and more difficult. Now, our research shows that a better approach to customer acquisition is a combination of technology, data, and the development of your people. In fact, after implementing our science-based programs to hire and scale their teams, several companies like yours have been able to achieve 130% of their targets with a 98% retention rate, while also reducing their discount rate and increasing their margins. So how are you handling your rising customer acquisition costs and lower retention rates? Would you be open-minded to learning more about how this company did it? Now, that's the kind of prospecting message that is designed to capture the attention of the person by giving them a point of data that maybe they didn't realize or hadn't fully considered before, and then asking that open-ended diagnostic question to get them to engage in a conversation with you. If your prospecting isn't helping you to differentiate and grab their attention, it's just another, hey, I'm just bumping this up to the top of your inbox in case you missed it kind of emails, then you're missing the boat in being able to differentiate not only from your competition, but from the status quo that they are all used to. So when you think about how to prospect, think about how to research in a way that is effective and scalable, that's going to deliver those insights that you can then share with your prospective customers to get them engaged with you. It's not necessarily about the quantity, but you don't want to give up too soon, but it's more about the quality of the messages that you're delivering. And so it's a balance between personalization and scalability. Now, we'll talk more about that in some future episodes, but I'm curious to hear if we have any questions that are coming in yet. So let's check now and see. All right, not yet, which means you're all still thinking about that. So let's talk about our next question. This is one that has been coming up a lot because discovery questions, or how to have better discovery calls, is something I think that everyone is looking to try to improve, which I love because I'm commonly saying that the close starts the moment you say hello. In fact, it starts probably a lot sooner than that when you consider how much research buyers are doing online. But as far as your first interaction as a seller with a buyer, how do you have that better discovery conversation? Now, I should say that I could write a book on this question, but I already did. But I do have 5 rules about how to be buyer first in our discovery conversations. But for the sake of time, let me just share my top 3 rules. Now, imagine for a moment that you go to the doctor and you tell them that you're having a whole bunch of bad stomach cramps, and they ask you maybe 2 or 3 different questions. Say, yeah, you know what? It's probably nothing. I'll give you this subscription, and then you can go on your way and let me know how it goes. Now, how likely are you going to be to trust that doctor's advice when they asked you barely enough questions to even understand, and they probably weren't really listening? Now, what if instead, when you go to the doctor, you tell them that you're having the cramps and they ask you multiple questions? They ask a question, you answer, they ask more questions about your answer. And you go back and forth, digging into what possible scenarios and options for each of these might be. Then finally, your doctor asks you, you know what? You know your body better than anyone. What do you think about this option versus this one? Which one's more doable for you? And then together, you come up with other questions that need answers and plans to address them. Then your doctor may prescribe some kind of diagnostic test in which you'll review together and come back with a plan. Now, how likely are you going to be to trust that doctor's advice and follow it? This is exactly how a buyer first discovery conversation should sound. Now, whether you're a business owner who's trying to find your first or next customer or a seller in a company, there are some basic rules of engagement when talking with your buyers that apply to all of these conversations. In fact, I would even argue that these are some rules that can apply to all of your conversations, whether you're in sales conversations or with your kids or with your family or with your friends. You can practice this on anyone around you. Now, the first rule, which if you've been watching me for any period of time, you've probably guessed is not about me. I can't believe I didn't wear the t-shirt today. But not about me. What this means is that it has to be our intent of listening and language and questions. It has to be focused on the other person in a sense of curiosity. Now, to do that, we need to be fully present, actively listening, and asking several really good questions that make them think. Now, I'm sure that you've all had that experience with someone, that person, the one where they sure might ask you a lot of questions, but no sooner have you started to answer the question than they start to interrupt you and tell them about them and their experience and their story. You know that person, the one that talks about themselves, what they're doing, what they think about everything and anything, and they never really stop a lot to ask about you beyond that first layer of question. The one that interrupts you all the time. I've been that person. You've been that person. We talk about ourselves, but what we want is not going to be tolerated that way by our buyers. It's so easy to do. And the reason for that has to do a lot with how our brains release dopamine when we get to talk about ourselves. As sellers, if we can resist that and ask the thought-provoking questions that get buyers to talk about themselves, not only will we better understand them, but the buyer is more likely to change their mind about how they're thinking about something, even if that is contrary to what they were thinking before. So how do we do that? When we ask buyer first questions to better understand our buyers and ask that, it makes the value making a change happen. So to do that, what I encourage you to do is first, don't think about interrogating your buyers. I want you to think about some really good questions. What this means is don't interrogate your buyers so that you can extract the most amount of pain from them. They know that's what you're doing, and that's why they resist it. And I know it sounds aggressive, but this is exactly what I see and hear happening on, far too many sales calls. And so what happens is that sellers have this list of questions that they need to get through, and get through them they will, or their manager is going to get them on them in the call review saying, you didn't ask these questions. But to your buyers, it sounds like, yeah, I know, Mrs. Buyer. You filled out my meeting form with your agenda and you wanted to have a demo and pricing at this point. But, I can't do that until I have asked you all of these questions to qualify you. So here's what I need to know. Blah, 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 blah. And all your buyers are hearing is that what they want and what they need and where they are does not matter to you. So start where they are. If they want pricing and they want a demo, then that is where you need to start. And weave in your back questions of how they got there and what they're trying already and who else needs to be involved. Weave it into that conversation, but you have to give people what they want because otherwise they're just going to opt out of the conversation. Their eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to be like, can we get to the part where I get to talk about what I need? That's what they're waiting for, and not very patiently. Nor should they be, because they're the buyer. They make the rules, hence the new golden rule. So to have better discovery calls, get a clear understanding of where your buyer is now. And so let's just say, for example, that they start with, I want to talk about a demo and I need to see these features and pricing. So let's just say you're selling marketing automation software and they say, I want to see about your email automation and I want to talk about the APIs. Ask a few questions like, so I understand you want to talk about these particular things. Let's start with the marketing automation. What's making that so important for you right now? And as they're answering the question, bring it up on your screen to show them that one piece. And when they tell you, hey, this is how we're doing it now, and then you can say, so based on that, how is that impacting your ability to achieve X? And when they share that with you, bring it up on your screen and say, so if you were able to do it this way, how might that impact your ability to do X? It's a very simple way to get the information that you need as a seller to understand what's going on with them, and also a way for you to give your buyer something that they need as to where they're at. There's a big movement happening right now called the product-led growth movement. And I believe that this is what this is focused on, is starting with where your buyers are at. It's not about you. It's not about where you need to be and what you need to get, but you do need to be able to build the case for them of why they should change the status quo. But you're not going to do that if you're immediately shutting them down with what they need to get, because they have their process and you need to align your process to theirs. All right. I could probably stand up on my soapbox on this for a little while, but we only have a few minutes left. So, questions that are coming up for you right now around this. How will you implement this? How will you be able to apply this into your sales conversations that you're having right now today? One other thing on discovery calls is we tend to ask a ton of questions, but that doesn't make them good questions. If you follow that buyer first or not about me, the first rule, then that's what's going to help you to have those better discovery conversations, because you're asking targeted question that you've researched in a way to elicit a response from them that they might even find valuable. But Gong data suggests to limit your questions between 11 and 14 per call. That's if you're not talking with C-level executives. C-level executives have even less patience to answer your interrogation questions. For them, Gong data suggests between 6 and 8. What I suggest that you do with this is that you design, let's say, 4 or 5 high-level questions with some clarification questions underneath that. Plan them out, practice them out, and use that as your guidepost for your conversations with your potential buyers in your discovery calls. And for your executives, I encourage you to do even more research in talking with their teams and sharing what you've learned by talking with their teams and what outside data also says that they might not realize, and then asking your diagnostic questions from there. This is how you can have better discovery calls that are buyer first focused, as well as more value adding, because you're working with them. You're not selling to them, you're selling with them. All right, I think that we have time for one more question. And this last question that I have coming up, it's one of those questions that I wish more people asked. And that's one of, how should I be researching buyers before we talk? Now, we talked about researching their industry and their role, how they got there, how they're measured, who do they report to, and what does that person care about? But I also want you to make sure that when you're doing this research and you look at what are the trends that are happening, the easiest way to do this is to subscribe to the places where they're going to be reading. So for me, for example, I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, Entrepreneur, and all of these other technological sort of base platforms where I can be reading the things daily that my buyers are seeing and reading daily, so that I can be relevant to the conversations that they're having. It makes me understand their world when I'm immersed in their world. So if you're selling to small business owners, look and see what Entrepreneur is talking about. If you're selling to enterprises, and look at what is a C-level executive going to be looking and reading about. I guarantee you that they're probably going to be reading the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. They're going to be keeping on top of the trends as far as what the markets are doing and the economy is doing and what's happening with supply chains. These are the places where you need to be spending your time in research. So go deeper. Immerse yourself in their world on a regular basis so that it's almost like you can think like they do. So those are my best tips for how to research, how to have better discovery calls, and how to actually engage with your buyers in a way that they're going to find valuable to them. So let's look at one last thing here and see if we have any more questions that are coming in. Lou, it doesn't look like we have a ton of questions coming in. So I'm hoping that all of you are going to be able to listen to this a little bit later on. And if you have questions that come up, please reach out to me and let us know. Now, before we close off, I want to make sure that everyone here knows about our newsletter, because this is something that we're putting out for subscribers only. Before we start talking about this on social media, we are talking to our audience about the things that we're learning every day in the research and the data. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to be first to know about the new things that we're learning in the research and data. And also subscribe to our newsletter on LinkedIn because we're posting it there as well as it starts to emerge. Now, I have one ask of you all, if you're all listening still, is I have this idea of how we can use these buyer first ask me anythings to really get inside the heads of our buyers. And well, the best way to do that is to actually talk to them. So I am looking for you. If you are an executive buyer, or if you are a buyer who's tried to buy something recently and been completely frustrated by the sales process, I want to give you a platform to voice those concerns. Because the more we can hear from you, the buyers, about what creates value for you and what doesn't, then that together is how we can apply some of this research and data that we're seeing into the real world. So if you'd like to be a guest appearance on the next Buyer First Ask Me Anything, shoot me a direct message through LinkedIn or through my Facebook account or even on YouTube and say, hey, I had this really awful buying experience and I'd like to dissect it with you. Or if you've had an incredible buying experience that you wish everybody could emulate, I want to hear about that too. Or you can also directly email me at Carol, Carol, don't forget the E, at unboundgrowth.com. Let me know that you're interested in appearing on our show, and we're going to make it happen. So until next time, everyone out there, have fun, keep learning, keep sharing, and we'll see you then. Bye, all.